I'm thinking I remember them.
Days of the week.
In Irish.
January, February. Oh, Jesus. You really have actually warped my mind there. January, February, March.
Try and do it backwards.
I just
How quick can you go?
No, I can't.
No, how quick can you go? Go.
I can't even go.
December.
I'm stuck.
December, November, October, September, August, July, June, May, April, March, February, January.
Tell you what.
Aye.
I'll tell you, I'm surprised you got stuck at March with 3 to go.
I thought I'd skip through June, but I hadn't.
But that was very good.
That wasn't half bad.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Did you catch it? Tell me you recorded that. Hey everyone, how you doing? Joe here, Conan here. Hi Conan.
Hi Joe.
Ronan back again. Hello Ronan.
Hi, Joe.
A few messages from people yesterday. My God, you're on a podcast.
Yeah.
So it's rugby today. It's largely Leinster Munster, if that's okay. That's all we had time for. Obviously, Connacht and Ulster will feature heavily across the season ahead, but Leinster Munster pretty much down to our last 400, 500, 600 tickets now for Croke Park. So Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent is in to talk all things rugby. Rory, obviously brilliant. And delighted to say Eoin Reddan is going to be on the coverage as well across the year at different times, regularly. And he is just, I think, right up there is about the most respected rugby brain amongst his fellow pros, as you'll find.
And coaches as well from an early age, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They leaned on him.
I always remember he didn't do much with Virgin Television on the rugby, but he was in one day around the time where Andy Farrell was getting a bit on into his tenure and things weren't going well, and they had just lost another game. And most of the pundits at that time were saying, I'm not really seeing a plan here. It's worrying in that it's not even like the plan's not working. It's like I can't even see what they're trying to do in the first place. And I distinctly remember Eoin being on the TV after one of those defeats, and he was saying things like, they've changed something in defence that I really like, and I can see certain things coming here. I think there's something coming with this team. And I always remember he used the phrase, we got to, if we take a helicopter view. And he said it a couple of times. It was just one of those phrases that subsequently across the week, a couple of other pundits even kind of mimicked, a helicopter view. It was kind of almost not a ridiculed opinion, but nobody else was really having it. But he was absolutely and totally vindicated.
Yeah,
I remember texting him 6 months later saying, a couple of people owe you an apology, So we're thrilled he's going to be on board here. He's as shrewd as it gets, Eoin Reddan, and he's going to be on with Rory very shortly.
I don't know if it's too small a sample size and not to go off on a tangent here, but like the lads who stepped away from what was then the Celtic League and went to the Premiership when it was at its peak cut and thrust seemed to come back way for the better, and he obviously spent a bit of time with Wasps. But I remember Leo Cullen and Shane Jennings as well became a huge source of information for that Leinster team that was up and coming. And I just wonder, it can't have been by coincidence that they were coming up against these top English sides week in, week out and coming back with nuggets of information.
There is a good line in the Sexton book about Jennings and Cullen. I think at this stage, look, if Kimmage has been allowed to do 10,000 words, I'm allowed to break my NDA for one sentence.
Well, the book is out today, I think, free plug.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. Well, then, there's lovely bits of humour in the book as well. But at one point he said ahead of a Munster game, or maybe it was it wasn't. It was just to get, random opposition, reasonably sized game. But he just sort of throws in a line like, and Leo Cullen and Shane Jennings had introduced a new concept to the pack, beat the shit out of the other team. And this was not a Leinster concept up until that point, but that was kind of the Leicester hard-nosed edge that they were missing, Anyhow, lots of emails coming in. It's a lovely thing to come in the morning and see your inbox with lots of different emails. So thank you so much. That's great. I'll get to a few of them. In terms of what's going on today in the world of sport, before we get into rugby, I guess you have to mention Rafa Nadal has announced he is retiring from professional tennis. He's going to play next month's Davis Cup, but he is done at the age of 38. 22 Grand Slam titles, 14 French Opens, Wimbledon champion twice, 2008, so memorably, that epic against Federer, which is still, I think, a lot of people's number one all-time match, our generation, and 2010 as well. The reality is that it's been difficult now for several years, these last two especially. He's talking about his injuries, of course. I don't think I've been able to play without limitations. Difficult decision, but in this life, everything has a beginning and an end. So it's all very nice. It's no Andy Murray's retirement tweet, never liked tennis anyway. But it's perfectly acceptable. So that's Federer gone in 22, Murray gone in 24, and now Nadal gone in 24 as well. You kind of run out of superlatives for the tennis. As a personality, almost akin to Federer, almost like above the nitty-gritty of like being dissected, or there are no controversies, like just one of the few, I think, where the talent was so awesome and maybe the personality wasn't so captivating. That with Federer and Nadal, you just have, well, it's their excellence, that's their thing. Whereas when Djokovic retires, we can do like 45 minutes on his excellence, but like with half an hour thrown in on dissecting the personality. I don't think that applies here with Nadal. And yet, interestingly, I don't think that's affected their popularity. You know, what I've just said there could strike you as me implying, well, they're a bit boring. But they were so excellent, they kind of rose above that more straightforward, borderline vanilla personality.
Yeah, the best thing you could dissect almost from Nadal in an interesting talking point is his serve routine. You know, where he pulls his shorts, he pulls his shoulders, he rubs his nose over and over. But like in terms of the rivalry before Djokovic came along, I couldn't believe today, Ronan, in the office when you went to the Messi-Ronaldo comparison, because that's really where it sat then as well, because it was very similar in terms of, you know, Federer had all the elegance. It came naturally. It was beautiful to watch. And people, I used to get into arguments with people about this. Maybe it's why I sort of leant more towards Ronaldo in that debate way before I realised that Messi was actually better. But I respected Nadal more because it's like, I know it's more gritty. I know it's wearing opponents down, but isn't that amazing that he actually won't stop? And then the 2008 final that you talk about, over 6 hours of the two of the best going at it. I never thought for a tennis match the world would sit still, but it just felt like everyone was glued to that final set, and it's Nadal just refusing to be beaten. And there's just something about that I really like, on top of all the elegance that Federer has.
Yeah, it was like serenity versus intensity, and like you kind of look for those things in sports media, I suppose. It's a narrative-driven thing, and when it's presented to you like this, the two guys who've gone along similar career paths but have done it in quite different ways, it was very striking, and that's a very notable embodiment, I think, for most people. Even passing tennis fans would cite that game routinely. So I suppose the difference in their case, and I mentioned to Conan as well, it was always Federer, Nadal, and then Djokovic came along. He's arguably better than both of them.
Yeah.
Whereas with Messi and Ronaldo, it still remains, I think, they're ironclad as the top two.
The kind of cheap aspect to my personality doesn't love the fact that the veneer of these two was so
flawless. Framed as such.
They were just so global. The blue chip sponsors, it all just felt a little too varnished, whereas Djokovic feels the opposite of that, and so I find him more interesting, if not necessarily more likeable. I still look at Nadal and Federer and I think, well, I never really knew you.
You're right, because there's something, at least Djokovic makes you feel something. And I do remember, I used to root for Andy Murray a lot, and when Federer would beat him, and he'd be thanking his sponsors, and it's like, oh, come on, like how much it would have meant to Murray, you know, and this guy's, like you say, so pristine, so polished, remembering to thank his sponsors in those moments. Yeah.
But again, their excellence is such that it was just about palatable for me. I didn't love the veneer and the kind of presentation and packaging of them, but to be fair to them, you put them on a court and it was just so awesome. Yeah, you couldn't but respect it and sort of love it all the same. So that's Nadal gone. I guess Djokovic is very much last man standing, and he's already ahead of the pack. Ireland-Finland tonight. Lots of you will hear this after the game, so we won't dwell on the situation. 1,300 Irish fans going over, by the way. Yesterday we had Hal Grimson's downward spiral comments. The back page of Paper Today was Nathan Collins. We're all sick of losing games. So this is kind of the mood going in. So we'll see how we go tomorrow. There was an email in on this from Sean in Donegal, who I think we should apologise to. Living in Scotland for the last 12 years. Morning, Joe. I haven't watched a game of Irish international football since Euro 2016. However, the pod's analysis has hooked me. He's talking about Dion and Dan on Tuesday. I'll be tuning in tonight so I can be fully on board with the meltdown tomorrow. Keep up the fantastic work. Kind regards, Sean from Donegal. Sean, we'll see you tomorrow. We're looking forward to it.
How did Sean know to buy out at that stage? I mean, talk about finding the peak to buy out.
Yeah. I'll keep us moving. A few other emails. Hi, Joe and team. Really enjoying the pod. Hearing your voice again on a podcast is like slipping your feet into a pair of warm slippers on a cold winter's night. Wow. That's Kieran from Monaghan. The reason for this email is not to tell you that. It's that yesterday Ronan came out with perhaps the greatest sporting term I've ever heard before, slobber knocker. I instantly had the image of the types of punches involved in a fight like that, big heavy hits, jaws wobbling, etc. I haven't been able to get it out of my head since. Are there any other words that you and the team would like to add to such a list? I have nothing off the top of my head, Kieran, but we'll give it some thought. Slobber knocker was a good one. My vernacular there would be to call that a slugfest. But slobber knocker obviously has a bit more the slobber.
Slobber knocker more, maybe it's more of a American football term or something.
Is it?
I don't know. No, but that, you know the way sometimes you're in the middle of a sentence and you're searching for a word and then you land on that and I'm like, that's actually pretty good. Yeah. So I'm happy enough.
No, it's good. By the way, just before we leave the football, that dreadful story out of Greece, there will be a minute's silence for Ireland's game on Sunday in Athens. You may have seen this, I'm sure. George Baldock died at the age of 31. Former Sheffield United defender. He was found dead in a swimming pool in a suburb in Athens yesterday, Wednesday. Greek international. He had signed for Panathinaikos this summer after spending 7 years at Sheffield United. He was a big figure in Chris Wilder's team, that team that surged towards promotion and then did well in the Premier League before being relegated, but had a great initial Premier League time. The police have been looking into the situation. They had a pathologist there, criminologist. There's no evidence of any criminal activity and no evidence of a burglary. So I'm sure more will become apparent in the coming days or hours indeed, but it's obviously a shocking story. FAI released a statement as well, incredibly saddened by the news of George Baldock's passing this evening. He played against Ireland in the Euro 2024 qualifying campaign, played with a number of Irish players at club level, so a few Irish players I'm sure terribly sad as well at the news. Our thoughts with family and friends, also the players and staff at the Greek Football Federation at this sad time. Obviously, minute silence as well before Greece's game tonight. So that's the latest on that George Baldock story, which is obviously shocking, terrible news, 31 years of age. Some other emails before we go. Yes, last one. Won't have time for anything else. We'll get to the rugby. So Kieran is talking about the Jim Gavin Football Rules Committee Interpro trial matches, which is, I guess, what they are. And obviously, we're all very taken with the rules and looking into them at the moment. But Kieran is just making the point. Something I think that's gone on under the radar here is there are going to be 4 Interpro games at Croke Park next weekend to test these rules out. If they go well, I think there's an argument to keep these games, just like the old Railway Cup, hype, fireworks, autumn night games before rugby and November internationals. A huge opportunity for excitement, promotion. Obviously, he mentions, I know in Oz, the State of Origin Rugby League players play all their game series at night and it's massive. I guess that is an aspect to this upcoming weekend. Like Jim Gavin has done, I'd recommend a look, by the way, on RTE. He's in the Sunday Game studio with Joanne Cantwell and he's going through all the rules, but with footage from some of the sandbox games and showing different things and taking you through the rationale and how it'll play out. And it's really, really good. As you might expect, Gavin is supremely convincing in an understated way. It's like this.
There's
is
an
maths.
assuredness, like
yeah,
to how meticulous he is.
yeah, 100%.
There's just one cool thing about it. Obviously, he splices his. I only saw a little bit of it, but he does splice existing footage. So he cites examples from the championship just gone, but also footage from the games, the sandbox games that were played. And it's actually really noteworthy that the patterns are similar. So you're watching something develop, the ball's turned over, but then the huge difference is there's 3 players up the other end of the pitch. You know, it's just there's 2 kick passes and someone's having a shot at goal. Like it is going to be very striking, I think, for when we're tuning in. Yeah,
and I guess that's what will take the headlines and that's what we'll talk about on the Monday or Tuesday after the games, no doubt. But what about this? There could be an accidental almost kind of regeneration of the Railway Cup. Like the Railway Cup could sneakily just be reborn before all our eyes and people could think, God, I loved it. Connacht against Leinster was amazing. Yeah. Look, I never watched the Railway Cup. I don't miss the Railway Cup. It's not for me. I know people when they're like, we should do it, but I don't know.
It might be for you now though. Like, how often do we complain about? Oh, we're not seeing teams of the same standard play against each other. We're not seeing that happening. We're not seeing football at the top level. Yeah. You know, 2 of the best really going at it. Now you're going to have 4 teams that are all pretty much the same standard, and they're going to be competing, and they're going to be trialing out these new rules, which is pretty cool. But I love the Railway Cup. It probably just missed a bit of the pomp that it deserved because it was just. Sometimes it was being played like in these random games, just fitting it in somewhere. Yeah. Players are pulling out and we did what we always do in the GAA. We started arguing about, is there space for this in the GAA calendar? And immediately once somebody asks that question, you have to back down. You'd say, oh, you're right, there's not the per club player, so let's not play these 3 matches. So I'd be well up for this. And maybe, like, if you think about the timing of this now, we've just announced the All-Star nominations. I mean, you could actually make this even bigger by creating an all-star select team from Ulster, Leinster, Connacht, Munster, and here is now the best 25 players from Ulster this year coming at the tail end of the championship, and at the end of it we'll all pick an all-star. This won't relate to who gets picked, but these are the select from each province.
But if they don't really care about it that much, and if players are dropping off and if it starts to feel exhibition-y, then I just have no interest in that.
To play the Croke Park with the TV cameras on them, I'd say the players will get on board. And maybe this is the way to go about it as well, rather than us always trying out new rules in the league and things like that. Why don't we just do this at the end of every year, where we get the best players from each province, put them together in Croke Park, and we try out new rules?
I think you have to incentivise the players who play for so-called weaker counties to give them this kind of a carrot, like whether that be international rules or Railway Cup, that their achievements are recognised. Like I'm thinking of Paddy Keenan, County Louth, or Gary Brennan, these kinds of players where they are, by playing with players from the top counties, they can see that they're at that level. You know what I mean? I just think that affirmation is one way of rewarding them, and to have that, like similar to like the NFL or NBA, where your stats speak for you and you can be pedestaled up there with the very best in the country. You mightn't get to an All-Ireland final, but I think those metrics are important.
I like that in theory. It can't be at a provincial ground in terrible weather and a kind of grimness about the whole spectacle. It has to feel big time. And then maybe that leads to the players really wanting it and wanting to win because eyeballs are on them. But I don't know. Look, it's an interesting point, Kieran. I hadn't heard anybody make the point that it could be an unintended consequence of these games, that everybody gets a little bit of a thirst for Railway Cup action again. I suspect I won't be one of those people.
We'll talk next week. Yeah.
Happy to be proven wrong. Okay, let's get on to rugby. Now then, very happy to say Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio once again. Ruth, thanks for coming in.
No problem. Good to see you, Joe.
Later on in a separate podcast, I should say, we will bring you an interview with Aoife Wafer. The Irish women's team are in action tomorrow night, Friday night, 8:30 p.m. Irish time, slightly more palatable than the other two games. And we'll talk to Aoife Wafer and Dave Kelly about the Irish women and how they're going in WXV1. So that is all waiting for you. Also happy to say Mr. Eoin Reddan is with us, who of course has played with Munster and Leinster in his time, and that is very much the focus of round 4 of the URC. Croke Park, Leinster Munster, 5:45, 8 o'clock in Belfast, Ulster against Connacht. Eoin Reddan, very nice to have you on. How you doing?
All good. Great to be here, Joe. Thanks.
I know you're a busy man. Are you still... Don't worry, I'm not going to turn this into an Eoin Reddan interview. Are you still in that leasing airport playing business? Is that what you're doing with your time? People will be curious.
Aviation, yeah. Still in that.
And if needs be, can you sort yourself out with a private plane, or how does that tend to work?
No, unfortunately not. Not Joe.
Not officially is what you're saying. So Croke Park, we're going to get to 80,000, I would think, Rory. First versus joint second in the table. Leinster first, maximum points through 3 games, and Munster quite a few bunched on 11, including Connacht, but they're joint second as well. We're at 75 last count.
Up beyond 80. I think there's less than 1,000 tickets left as you speak, and I think it's getting close to a sellout. I think we can almost... we can declare that it's going to be sellout, and I think I said this on Monday, but it's an incredible vindication of this fixture of where top level Irish rugby is, of what's been built over the last 25 years. I know we've had a sellout at Croke Park before, but for a European semi-final is very different to a regular season round 4 URC game. I remember Eoin was one of the fiercest defenders of whatever it was called at the time, the Pro 14, when we used to do Leinster press conferences, that the league was really important, that it was a really viable competition that we should all buy into more. And it was dismissed at times over the years, but I think it's also a vindication of the URC and its current format. But really these fixtures, these interpros do almost sit on their own, and Leinster and Munster, the rivalry, which I thought had been diminished with Leinster's dominance over the last 10 years. Jack Crowley's kick put it back on the map. Ireland's success, the fact that the tickets are cheaper than internationals, the fact that they're more accessible than internationals. You know, it's a bigger stadium than we can get for international games as well. all feeds into this. There's not as many big games in Croke Park this time of year either, so there's a few different factors at play. But it's so such a good news story for Irish rugby that they can get a crowd like this at this time of year, and it really kicks the season off.
Oh, and I possibly would have been one of those back in the day who would have been scoffing as you tried to talk up the Pro 12 or the Pro 14. Is this competition starting to realise the potential you felt was there?
I mean, the abiding memory was I suppose playing in the Premiership at the time, which felt hard, but had loads of positive press. And if you played a match at the weekend, I suppose the press had 12 teams to cover, and they'd pick out the top 3 or 4 teams and cover those teams. So I suppose it was a good competition to play well in. When teams played well, they got called out for it. There's plenty of positive stuff to talk about. When I came home, certainly from what I was expecting to what I got, like the standard was much higher in the URC than it was at that time in the Premiership. The games were tougher, more intense, but I don't think people realise that certainly after the game when I read about the game or speak to other people about the game, I think there's just because there's 4 teams and we're so focused on those 4 teams, everyone's under a microscope, whether it's good, bad or indifferent. And I think it probably leads to a maybe more realistic view of where we're at as players and teams in Ireland, but probably hurts the competition a little bit. I think it's getting better. I think we need this fixture tomorrow to be really competitive. I'm talking over the long term. This game needs to be a 50-50 over the next 10 years if we're to have people winning Heineken Cups regularly. I think we really need to drive each other's standards here. It's not that the rivalries in this island are amazing, and they really help drive on our performance in Europe and at Irish level. So I think it's really important that continues like that or moves towards that way over the next 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that's part of this story. I mean, there's a novelty aspect to Croke Park for sure still when it comes to a rugby match. I think you're right, Rory, when you talk about fans who can't get to big Irish test matches wanting feel of the big time and suddenly, you build it and they will come. The experience economy is also booming, be it dynamically priced Oasis tickets or Taylor Swift. There's just an appetite to go to things and do things. So this game's almost taken on a momentum, as you heard. God, it's at 60,000. And then I think the remaining 20,000 say, geez, this is going to be big, so I'm going to go. And you felt it would sell out from that point on. But you alluded to the other point, which is this rivalry has woken up. There's been like a decade of stasis. I'll get Eoin's take on one aspect of it in a moment, which is I think Joe Schmidt and the IRFU took the sting out of this thing shortly after 2009. But also then Munster went off a cliff and now they're back. Yeah,
I think that there is a validity in that. I think by Ireland, the Irish team and the Irish squad becoming so tight-knit did, everyone's talking about Johnny and the different elements of Johnny because of the book this week, but there is you couldn't imagine Jack Crowley standing over Johnny Sexton in the way that Johnny stood over Rog, because what Andy Farrell has built with the Irish team, well, for a number of reasons, but what Andy Farrell has built with the Irish teams, they are so close that, I've seen Irish or Munster and Leinster players go for dinner together on the night after they played, which, would never have happened, I think, in the previous era. And that is, that we lost something to gain something else. And, Team Ireland is what pays the bills. It's what drives everything. It is what brings the whole thing together at the end of the day. And a successful Irish team is good for rugby overall. But there was a sense that the rivalry was diminished. I think what diminished it more really was that Munster were struggling to land the glove on Leinster up until that moment where Crowley dropped the goal. Even in that semi-final, the Munster crowd that travelled was smaller than it would have been 5-10 years before, because every season of Johan van Grand's tenure ended in either a final or a semi-final defeat to Leinster in Dublin.
And very passive defeats as well, really bad games.
Some passive, some where they put it up to them, but they kind of chose a very kind of Springbok, probably 2019 Springboks approach of kind of box kick and put Leinster under pressure, and they still weren't able to get there. And Munster fans, I think, lost a little bit of kind of their not their love for the team, but their love for the way the team was playing and their belief that they could get a result, because it's no fun if you know if you know deep down that you're going to lose. A lot of people did stick with them. I'm not writing off the Munster support, but I think the people who travelled there on Saturday do so more in expectation that the team will play a certain way, and they'll, like last year in the Aviva Stadium in the first game, when they scored that brilliant Craig Casey try in the corner on the back of unbelievable attacking play that burst open the Leinster defence, that they'll at least challenge Leinster in certain ways and put it up to them. they'll struggle, I think, because they don't have as deep a squad as Leinster. I think their starting 15 when everyone's fit is a very good team, and their bench can be good if they get everyone fit. They're in a bit of an injury hole at the moment. But I think the game style that Mike Prendergast is playing has people on board. And I think there'll be a lot of patches of red amongst the blue on Saturday. I'd anticipate a fairly substantial travelling support.
Oh, and you arrived in 09, the summer of 09, so you missed out in Croke Park. I'm talking from memory here, and there's a degree of perception, so you can give me your more lived experience, your reality. I felt like things were really nice and spiky and juicy in the immediate years after 09, and there were some really kind of vivid games, really good games. My suspicion was Joe Schmidt and the RFU felt it was getting a bit too hot and took some heat out of it, took some big name players out of certain games and just let the thing cool down for the betterment of Ireland. Was that your memory? Is that your experience of it, or am I off there?
I think you're a bit off.
Right.
I think you look at Munster at the moment and you think about tomorrow, or Saturday, they have players now who won't sleep at night if they don't show up with and give it absolutely everything and want to show up and beat Leinster and know what that means for their international career and know what that means for their Lions career and you need teams full of people like that, and it doesn't have to be standing over someone shouting at them and it can be that, right? I mean, that's how Johnny did it. But I see that same level of desire in players playing for Munster now. I don't think there was anyone necessarily trying to take the spice out of it. I mean, there was a while when there was a few years where I noticed there was only Irish qualified players playing. I didn't know of any. Was that a certain thing? But Eason Asiwe, for example, wouldn't be playing in that game the odd time. And then there was other years where both teams were absolutely, picked full strength teams. So I don't know, was there any diktat? But for me, I think it's players who just really epitomise the want and desire that both these teams have had over history, you say, when they're at their best, and bringing that to a match like Saturday. And I think both teams have that now, and it's something they look to build on.
Okay. Munster form generally this season, so opening week it was like a tri-bonanza against Connacht, they came out on top, and then there was Parma where they had a bonus point in the bag at half-time and conspired to throw it away. Donncha O'Callaghan called them embarrassing, and then in Cork at the weekend just gone, they beat Ospreys 23-0 in shocking conditions. It was a night for kicking and chasing only, an application, but they did it, and it was a perfectly respectable performance. Peter O'Mahony, Ollie Jaeger are out ahead of Saturday. Last year, they were a slightly complicated bunch to analyse in that you could never get too far away from the fact that they were ravaged by injuries. There were so many games, both in Europe and domestically, where they were in good nick, 60, 70 minutes in, and then it got away from them. Their bench wasn't really strong enough. You think like Exeter away, certain games like that linger in the memory. And then towards the end of the season, they just didn't manage to get over the line in either competition. So what kind of shape are they in as we kind of have the first really big Leinster challenge of 2024?
It's very hard to tell yet. I think, they certainly appear like a very tight-knit group of coaches and players. And I like the way they managed through the last 10 days, especially with say Donncha's comments, for example, and I was just the way the camp responded to that seemed to be quite, measured and calm and together, which I think was great. I'm not surprised. I know Graham Rowntree, myself and him were in Wasps together at the same time, so well able to pull a group together and have them tight, which is great. So I think it's very hard to tell before the weekend. It's very early on. This is obviously a huge test. And what you hope is that a season like last year breeds experience for other players who've had to come in when there's injuries on, who've experienced, a bit of taste of disappointment, and what's that done to them in terms of their appetite to drive on this year, and how much they believe they can start to push into Irish teams and beat Leinster, and that's what you need. And I think they're building that. I do think, as I said earlier, you have a group of players down there now who find it hard that they're not the number one, and they want to push on and be that. And that, for me, is the critical point that I'll be looking to see on Saturday, is that kind of desire is there from all the way through, that they can keep building on that.
Craig Casey, generally been talked about, has been in good form. Owen, I'm sure you watch scrum halves that extra bit closer. What are you seeing on Casey's part? Yeah,
there's lots of good scrum halves. Play. Ben Murphy's been going well for Connacht as well. Quillan Blade went well when he came on last week. And Craig's been playing well. And Craig's one of those players, exactly what I said at the start, where you can see what this means to him, how much it means to him to play for Munster. You can kind of tell from the way he plays how much he wants to be on the Irish team, or how much he believes he can do it, and how much he wants Munster to be at the top table in Europe. And I think, he's someone who I think will need a big game on Saturday. Then there's a lot on the table for him, right? This is the game where he can start to question the running order for Ireland more than any other game. So I think it's a big game for him. He's been playing well and coming at a good time.
What's striking you, Rory?
It was such a shame that his start for Ireland in South Africa was brought to a shuddering halt by that Ruaidhri Snyman tackle, because I thought it was going really well for him, and it was a bit of a breakout performance for him, because he's been in that Ireland camp for an awful long time as the third wheel, and my sense is that if anything happens to Gibson Park, it's not going to be Murray anymore who steps up. It's going to be Casey, but they love Murray off the bench. Even on Saturday, as soon as things started going a little bit awry for Munster in that second half, when they were playing into the wind and Ospreys were starting to get on top and get their game going, Murray started warming up, and he was on pretty early, even though Casey had played really well, because they have a lovely 1-2 punch with the pace, the kind of driving leadership that Casey brings, and then the calmness and experience that Murray can bring off the bench. I think he's in a lovely place. I spoke to him around, April last year. He wants that Ireland 9 jersey. He believes he can take it off Gibson Park's back, and that's exactly what Owen was saying. That's what we want from the players going into this fixture, because that's going to bring the best out of Gibson Park, who would have watched with his nursing his hamstring last July, going, hang on a second, all three of the scrum halves that played in that series did really well, and Ben Murphy's been outstanding. The lads who were on the emerging tour have done well as well, so we're suddenly in a nice position in that regard. But the two guys, certainly Gibson Park has been way out in front for a little while now. Casey showed he can close the gap, but he needs to do it. Like Andy Farrell values consistency over everything else. Consistently showing up week in, week out, being a good pro, and not letting your standards slip when the cameras are off. So like the Zebre performance would have damaged, I think, a lot of Munster people in his eyes, because they're the weeks where you really have to show it. So backing up the Ospreys game now this week will be another step in the right direction for him, and I think he's capable of it. I think he's a really, really good player, and they value him, his mind as well. He's a good presence behind the scenes.
You said there that Munster's first 15 are their absolute best team. Very, very strong. Just how strong? On their best day, can they pretty much take Leinster and anyone in Europe, or still a bit to go on that front?
Yeah, they probably need the other team to have a little bit of an off day if you're talking about Toulouse, Leinster, La Rochelle. But beneath that, I think they can take anyone. And yeah, if they bring their best, I'm actually doing a kind of one of those things where you rank the players against each other for Saturday's paper, and I'm looking at it. Their tight five still doesn't have Andrew Porter, Tyke Furlong, and say a fit Dan Sheehan. The second row does. They've got John Klein and Tyke Byrne, a match for anyone. Their back row, unbelievable talent. Casey Crowley started a test against South Africa for Ireland. Their midfield, when everyone's fit, they've lost Frisch, who's I thought was a really exciting player who gave them something different. They've brought in Tom Farrell, who's a tidy, lovely professional or provincial player, but he hasn't gone to that next level. Nankivell, I think if he was Irish, he would have a few caps. Back three, I think Zebo's a loss to them. They're probably a little bit less flashy, but they're really well coached. And I think what Leamy and Prendergast have brought behind Roundtree is a real clarity of game plan and a game style that suits the players they have. And really, when everyone's fit, they then have a bench that can hurt teams. But when everyone's not fit, that's where they really hurt. Because I think Leinster have a couple of benches they can play and they can get through a season, whereas Munster struggle a little bit in that regard. So I don't think they're far off. Last year I tipped them as a kind of an outsider for Europe, but their campaign was left in ruins as a result of injuries and also game control. But they topped the URC table last year. They are a fine team, but like when you look at what they have available this weekend, it does damage them when they lose O'Mahony, when they lose those players. Now they're getting Tom Ahern back, who I think is unbelievably good. Nankivell's back. Mike Haley's going to make it looks like. So they will have very good players on board. But what they can bring on that final quarter when Leinster are bringing on Ruaidhri Snyman and Ryan Baird potentially at the same time, that's the difference.
Yeah, I'll put that same one to you on before we move to Leinster. If in a magical world, and it hasn't happened for them in quite some time, everybody's fit, whereabouts are Munster when they're at their best?
Yeah, I think Rory's point is right there. When you're talking about not having Tyke or an Andrew Porter or Dan Sheehan, I mean, they're world class players, so there's a big gap between them and most teams anyway. So I think, and that shows up a lot. It's not the same as having a gap out in the wing with a player. I think that particularly in Munster Leinster games, scrum does become important. And a tight game can become not a tight game very quickly with a few penalties. So that's a huge area for them. And to kind of really nail that tomorrow or nail that on Saturday is a big thing. Apart from that, I kind of agree with Rory. I mean, it's you can see players matching up. You can see players having a go. I think Tom Farrell's a very interesting signing. I think he'll be brilliant for Munster. I played a bit with Tom in Leinster and played against him many times, and he's one of the most underrated players I've played against or with. Really good skills. So it'll be very interesting to see how he goes on Saturday, and very close to Ireland a number of times. I think he's been capped, Rory, is he?
No,
is he captain in America?
He was in cap. He was in camp a couple of times under Joe, and Joe really rated him, but injuries came at bad times, and he hasn't been involved since. But he's been close, I think, and I think they rate him, but he's just had a bad run, and obviously he's in an unbelievably competitive position.
Yeah, so I think he'll be a good signing. So I think it comes down to really, trying to nail the front row, Joe, and their performance to kind of unlock the whole team's ability really then to compete.
Okay, so that's maybe the question mark still. On Leinster own, they'll say, well, we don't give a damn what anyone else is saying about us, but every other team on the back of last year and the last couple of seasons of their level will be saying, well, with this bunch, there's a question mark over the last 10 minutes of big games. So we just stay in games with them and then we see how they're feeling. And that's kind of the psychology at play here. Do you feel like this Leinster team own, and I know it's difficult when you're looking in from the outside, but do you feel like they have been damaged by these defeats in the last couple of big finals? Are they potentially fragile a touch in that department, or what's your sense?
I can't say how they're feeling, but I think for me, looking from the outside, what they did last year was pretty incredible given the changes they had. So that defensive system is the best defensive system in the world. I think that's not disputed, right? We've seen multiple World Cups won now at this stage. But it is not something you can learn in on the fly in the season, halfway through a season, and then go and deliver every third week because you're not all playing together, and then show up in a massive game and deliver. So to get stepping back from it at the end of the year, to get to where they got to, trying to build that system in, was pretty remarkable. And not surprising that things didn't go according to plan all the time, and so I mean that is kind of part of their journey now, right? So what as a result of that, you have teams who think like you just said, Joe, which is fair enough because they've seen it happen, and it's more about how Leinster can own that journey, right, and own that like that's the reality of what happened last year, and now you're 12 months on, you're adding considerably to the squads in terms of who they've signed. You're getting a pre-season with a coach who's got time to implement, again, it's the best defensive system, but one of the hardest ones to implement, and a system that gets better. So, certainly in my experience, when I was at Wasps, we would have been defending back then, I suppose the equivalent of that now. It's actually got more aggressive than we had it, but the point was it was still very new to everybody back then. And, the things I remember about it, one was it was incredibly hard to learn. So when somebody new joined as one person, that person would struggle to get it right for a few weeks or a few months. Never mind one coach joining a whole team, trying to get them to get it right. Number two, when it went wrong, you felt under pressure when it went wrong, and that leads to mistakes, right? And I think you saw a bit of that. We saw a bit of that throughout the year. But number three, when it goes right, it's usually on a big day, because when every other team in the world back then was trying to say skip passes or nail something very technical on a big day, you're really focusing on tackling people harder, which when you're really up for a game is not actually that hard to do. It's one of the easier things to do. So, the bigger the game, the better it'll get. And I think the fact that bringing those three things into this season, with the signings they have, I expect Leinster to be, much, much, much better. And I think the coaching team and the squad, in hindsight, when they look back in a few years, we'll look at what last year and say, look, it's part of our journey. Yes, it created doubts in other people's minds, hopefully not in theirs, because of what they've achieved, what they did achieve was pretty remarkable. And it can be part of their journey, and they'll be better for it. It's
brilliant insight, because I would say, Rory, in the context of Owen's answer, you think to Loftus Versfeld when you were there, and the Bulls, not fazed by a rush defence at all, out half perfectly used to it, and they picked it apart and did it out wide. And there were certain tries where, the co-commentators know a hell of a lot more than I do, but they're pinpointing, well, it was the wrong decision to shoot in that instance, but you wonder if the players are almost juggling an instinct not to shoot, but also probably Nina Bar saying to them week in, week out, you go, and it's my fault if it goes wrong. And then that probably causes hesitation, which undermines your effort to shoot in the first place. And it all just looked undercooked, which you know, when you hear Owen's answer, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think Loftus is more explainable as a mental one, they have an unbelievable focus on the Champions Cup, and it is everything to them. So to have to go to South Africa 2 weeks later to play a semi-final against a team who that was their season, I think there was still a hangover at play. There were still they were definitely mentally damaged in that regard, in terms of just not like. They didn't need that, you know, and that was their own fault for not getting enough points on the board across the season. I think that's one of their big lessons. You see, they've got 15 points from 15 so far this season. They are trying to accumulate the points so that they don't have to go through that scenario again. In London, in the Champions Cup final, where I come and go with this the mental thing is it was them who finished the 80 minutes stronger. They got control of the last 10 minutes of the game. They got on top of Toulouse. They got themselves in a position to win the game. And if Kieran Frawley got that kick on target, we wouldn't be having this discussion. We would have been talking for 6 months now about how mentally strong that Leinster team are to bounce back. Now then something different happened. They got a bit frazzled, I think, in the extra time period. It was a bit haywire with, you know, the coaches were down at the touchline where they hadn't been on the touchline all day. Things went awry for them, and almost they hadn't got it back by the time they got to the Bulls. Almost, you know, they needed the end of the season to come to try and figure out what went wrong. But Owen's points about pre-season, they've banked a lot of work now. They understand the system more. I'm still not sure that they have the players to play it in the way that South Africa do. I think the key to South Africa is Arenza on one side and Kolbe on the other, who are two of the greatest wingers we'll ever see, and particularly at doing that job of they're so quick on the turn, their scramble is amazing. Kolbe is such a complete player and his decision making is so good. Larmer and Lowe are a different profile. You know, they're doing it to the best of their ability. Ringrose seems to be the key decision maker, and I just see him shooting up and making mistakes. Now, by the time we get to April, May, maybe he's making those reads better as he adapts and adjusts to it. But I wonder about it, and I also wonder if they have, if the defensive application is taking it out of what they can do in the rest of the game. Whether they have the fitness, the legs to be able to do what they used to do under Lancaster and multi-phase in their attack, and whether. Like, their attack ran aground in big games last year to me, and I think part of the reason for that, as a professional coach said it to me, is like they don't have the energy to be able to do what they used to do on the attack. And I don't know if Owen found that with Wasps, but when you're putting that much energy into one part, can you get it back for the other? So I still have question marks over it, but I do think they're better set up this year. And then you put in the Slimani coming off the bench in every game, and you know, I don't know where they're going to play him, but when they get Jordy Barrett on deck and he's knocking over penalties from 60 metres, they've got a hell of a chance this year.
Owen, come in on the attack point first then.
I think when you get the defence right, it's actually easier, right? You're not chasing shadows. You get on top of you get up top of teams and control them well. I think the hard thing last year, and I don't know this, but the hard thing last year, like when you if you think about it, Niambar is winning a World Cup right into November, and you know, landing in then and trying to win a European Cup, and everybody work out, you know, how's he going to want to defend? How's he going to want to attack? How am I going to get on the team? If you think about individual players are thinking, even in the period before he gets there, and then trying to read him and learn it, and because there's a lot of that going on, right? There's a new coach coming in, which means for everyone, it's a new script, it's a new chance, and you're trying to do that, still stay part of a team and still deliver as a team. So I think what they did, you know, there's going to be parts of the game you can say they could have been better at last year, but I think last year's not really any kind of fair testing ground or judgment ground, given the time they had and the consistency, and you know, and when they joined, I think before he joined, you know, if you thought about it, if you were hiring Niambar, you'd say, well, the biggest risk is he's not joining till after the World Cup. The biggest risk is, and then all of that happens. And could we deliver a decent season if that happened? And in the end, it was very nearly a great season anyway, but it turned out to be not because of those 2 weeks. So I think it's not. I think this season really is, and I'm quite confident how they'll go. Certainly, the attack looked pretty, I know, albeit against Treviso, who are a pretty decent team who actually at this time of year down there looked pretty undefendable last week at times, right? The one thing I'd love for everybody to think about when they talk about shooting, especially in the media, like in the olden days, there was the lines weren't, defensive lines weren't going forward, right? So when someone shot, you'd call it shooting, okay? Today, everyone is supposed to be shooting. So when I go forward and I'm shooting out of the line, there's 4 lads who haven't gone with me. And, when you see that, you need to stop and say, actually, okay, Gary's made a read there, but why is Gary 8 yards ahead of everybody else in the team? Is he that much fitter? The answer is no. So, like, in this defensive system, the emphasis just changed slightly from, you go as slow as your slowest guy to you go as quick as your quickest guy.
Yes,
so
okay.
as a player, you're like, I have to get set, I have to get ready, I have to go. And it doesn't matter how tired I am, I have to get with the guy who's going first. And that's why the speed's gone up so much. But it's really important, even for kids at home, to be hearing about it. Like, to be constantly hearing that someone making a read and going forward is an error is actually wrong, because half the time it's the person inside or outside who hasn't gone with them who's led to the gap. I think it'd be helpful if people started to actually see it like that, and think, it could be the person who didn't go is wrong here. You know,
fair point. So who's going to marshal this attack is the ever-present question for Leinster of late. Kieran Frawley was a 10, started at 10 against Benetton. I'm watching a lot of rugby at the moment through the prism of Johnny Sexton's book. So I'm at a phase in the book where he's still learning his craft, and David Knox is working with him, and he's watching Dan Carter very closely. And one of the things around this period of his life he's very focused on is getting that second touch on the ball. So he'll start something and then he won't necessarily even follow the ball. He'll just keep running vertically towards the posts if he's in the middle of the pitch and hope that it comes his way again. And so I half suspected he would have been nodding approvingly at Kieran Frawley's try-own and thinking that's what I'm talking about. And maybe it's harsh to bring Ross Byrne into it, but it's hard to imagine him, the speed and the fend off and all of that kind of stuff. So I suspect the majority at this stage are looking at Frawley and saying, surely now it's the time. Who would you like to see as the de facto 10 at Leinster?
God, it's a big question. I don't like making de factos.
You can change your mind next week. It's the beauty of it.
Look, the thing I'd say is, and you're talking about Johnny or Raj or Paul or Craig Casey or Peter Mahoney, they all had something in common, which was they knew you had to rip the jersey off someone to get picked. Like, you don't get picked unless you go and take it. And, I think that Frawley has done that in the last, since the tour, right? Since going for drop goals in the final, missing them, standing up, going for them again, getting them. So I think he's decided this is how you get on this team. It's the penny's dropped with him, and for now, I mean, he's demonstrated that and he's gone after it. It's going to be very hard for anyone to stand up and say, in terms of mentality, that's not the right mentality to be chasing for Leinster at the moment. Now, for all the talk, Ross has still done some amazing things for Leinster, because all the talk about how we've talked about the defence and how defence is going across the game. Like, years from now, people will be passing the ball by kicking. It'll get better and better and better and better, right? So, that's just going to happen. You talked about the semi-final last year where they were totally comfortable with this defence and able to kick better and better. And Ross has brought some amazing days on that front as well in terms of playing crossfield kicks. But at the moment, you can't argue with what happened the last few weeks of the tour there, where he stood up and won the game for Ireland. So I think back to your point of reading Johnny's book, it's everyone does it differently, but for me, that's top drawer provincial and international players are people who instinctively kind of go after that and take jerseys. They're never given them.
Rud, for the 4 millionth time in our sitting across the table from each other, give us a quick version of you agree, Frawley, but secondly, what you think will happen here in the short term.
Yeah, look, it looks like Frawley's in position and in possession. And I think there's a kind of a perception out there that everyone's trying to retire Ross Byrne and get him out of the club. Like, I want to see a Ross Byrne responds to not being in the team. I want to see Ross Byrne coming on after 60 minutes and then implementing the stuff that he does well. Because when Frawley came on in that second test, yes, he nailed 2 brilliant drop goals. He also made 1 or 2 really poor decisions that almost handed the game to South Africa. So he is not perfect, and no one is claiming that he is. I think there's a frustration that, especially last year when he came on in this Munster game when Byrne got injured, that he wasn't backed on the back of that performance, that it was Harry who was given the jersey the following week. Because what I want to see is Kieran Frawley given that responsibility over a reasonably extended period, and then him showing that he's able to do it. Because I think what's happened in the past, he's been bumped around the back line. We can see what he can do, but we've never seen it week on week at 10. There's a kid coming back from South Africa this week. I don't know when the Emerging Ireland flight is getting in. He's going to have a big say in this as well. Sam Prendergast Like Ireland started them on all 3 games of the Emerging Ireland Tour for a reason. The Ireland coaches, are investing a lot of time. On the eve of the first test in South Africa, I happened to be staying in the team hotel. The rest of the team had broken up. The coaches had gone to their rooms or gone to dinner or whatever. Andy Farrell was sitting in the lobby having an extended conversation with Sam Prendergast. There is a project there happening. Like, this is one of the most talented out-halves to come through in anywhere in the world in the last couple of years. He's a year younger than Sasha Feinberg Mngomezelu, who was brilliant for South Africa in the Rugby Championship. He is coming, and it's up to now him to go and do what Owen's talking about and rip the jersey off Frawley's back or Burns back or Harry Burns back, whoever's got it. So Kieran Frawley has a little bit of a small window to get this done, but if he takes the chance, he's number 2 to Jack Crowley for Ireland, I think, going into November. He'll want to see this as a chance to displace Crowley, I would imagine, to get on top. And he's got a fire he's lighting a fire under Ross Byrne and Jack Crowley, and then there's a fire being lit from beneath. So there shouldn't be a defined hierarchy. Like, it shouldn't. I mean, you should have some clarity around your 10. But if Frawley stinks the joint out for 4 or 5 weeks, yeah, Ross come back. But I just would like to see that 4 or 5 weeks of Kieran Frawley.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those positions you need a bit of security in your position for a bit of a run, just so you can make mistakes and make decisions with a sense of calmness. So that's Leinster Munster. We'll obviously talk about it next week. It promises to be an amazing game. That's 5:45 Croke Park, just before the clock comes against us. Connacht are in Belfast at 8 o'clock. Also joined second, by the way, 11 points, and could very easily have beaten Munster. Pete Wilkins reasonably happy. We're in a much better place than we were last year. Stephen Ferris, I saw say Ulster are too nice to play against. They've come off the back of 2 defeats in South Africa. I guess like that can absolutely happen. I mean, losing away to the Bulls is no great crisis. So another interesting game here in Belfast. Rory, give us the scene set.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the better fixtures the last couple of years. Ulster Connacht, they've been very evenly matched, and right now Connacht are in a better place, and Ulster, having won their first game at the death against Glasgow at home, which was a really important win because that South Africa tour always looked daunting. Kind of are in that position again where they just need to keep the home crowd on board. I think everyone's behind Richie Murphy up there. He's impressed everyone with the way he's gone about it. He's a bit of spikiness about his comments yesterday. Pete Wilkins kind of said, "Look, it looked like they picked that team against the Bulls, a couple of kids with us in mind." And
he may well be right.
Well, Murphy said he should think about it, talk about his own team and not mine, basically. Which is I like. He's standing up for himself and standing up for his organisation. He has been probably harmed more than anyone else by the Emerging Ireland Tour. Like Izuchukwu and Harry Sheridan are 2 of his best players, and he hasn't had them for those 2 weeks. So he'll be delighted to get them back whenever he does. Jules Postlethwaite comes back for this game. He's a fine player. I think Connacht are in better form and will go up with absolutely no shortage of belief that they can get the job done. Like, Ben Murphy has been exceptional. Carl Ford has made a really strong start to the season, kicking the winning points. He can play 10 or 12 or 13. Bundy's back. They have Mac Hansen, Cordero. They've got a really talented backline, and their pack with Josh Murphy's impressed me since he's come back. He had a year out to finish his medical studies last year. He played for Clontarf in the AIL. He's come back with a real point to prove, and he's been really good. So I think Connacht are in a better place right now, but Ravenhill's a tough place to go. Yeah,
it's good. A final word from you. I'm going to be interesting. So you're feeling good about Leinster this year. Munster get lucky with injuries. They're in a good place. Connacht look to have started the season really well. A big year in Richie Murphy's life here.
Yeah, it is. He seems to have the group humming well and everyone fully behind him. And these fixtures, are huge actually. Like Connacht at home over the course of a year, these ones kind of shape where everyone's head's at around, I suppose, internally within their team, everything. So it's a massive game for them this week. And they probably need to win more than Connacht based. And I kind of agree with Rory there about Connacht going well. And after the trip to South Africa, it's a tough game, right? They need to win this weekend probably. Wouldn't say need to, but it'd be very helpful for their season to get the ball back going again with a win. But it's a big season for him. Yeah, I mean, I obviously was with Richie a lot. Knows his great rugby knowledge. Always very good at sharing it and coaching it. So I haven't been surprised to see him doing so well to start off with. And hopefully he can continue and they can have a good season.
Okay, well, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation next week off the back of these 2 games. It'll really maybe shape the season in some respects. Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, thank you very much.
Thanks,
as
Joe.
ever. And Eoin Reddan, super to have you on, Eoin. It's much appreciated. We'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.
Cheers. See you guys.
Owen Reddan and Rory O'Connor there. We'll be talking obviously about all the weekend's games. I would think early next week, possibly Tuesday. I suspect we might talk about the Ireland match on Monday and have a Not the Monday panel as well, but we'll probably get back to the rugby on Tuesday, give or take. And keep an eye on your feed. We do have that interview with Aoife Wafer also coming out today. See ya.